Welcome back everyone to episode number 9 of our watercolor series. In today's episode we're actually not going to be painting, we're actually going to be learning how to stretch watercolor paper, when do we want to stretch watercolor paper, why we stretch it, and then some do's and don'ts. And I'm going to show you the technique that I use. I've been using it for many years and it's never failed me. I know there's other techniques out there, but this one's a good one and it's pretty reliable. So we're going to get right to it, but I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for supporting and watching these episodes. And as always, if you're finding these things helpful, please let somebody else know. Share it with somebody. They might find it helpful as well. Okay? So don't forget to subscribe, hit that little bell button, and alright, let's go ahead and get started. So when you're stretching watercolor paper, you want to make sure that you're using cold press watercolor paper, and it needs to be 140 pounds or greater. If you use the thinner watercolor paper, it really doesn't hold up, and some of the hot press watercolor paper is not really meant for stretching, and some manufacturers will actually tell you that on their product. Okay, so 140 pounds cold press watercolor paper. When do we want to stretch paper? If you are doing a full sheet like this right here, or if you are doing a half sheet, right, I would actually recommend that you stretch. Okay, anything smaller than that you can get away with taping, but half sheet or bigger, I would highly recommend that you stretch it. Okay, the type of board that you want to use for stretching, the ideal board is just good old-fashioned plywood. Now you can use construction grade or you can use furniture grade, but make sure it's plywood. And you want to avoid this stuff. This is called MDF, which is medium density fiberboard, and you want to avoid particle board. Both of these boards don't react well to water. They'll start to fall apart, and sometimes they actually mold on you. So avoid those for this. You don't want to use that at all. Okay. You also want to avoid the masonite board. The reason that you want to avoid the masonite board is because masonite is perfect for taping, so you'll see me use this a lot, but the staples, they don't go in there very well. Sometimes they bounce right off. So this is not good for what we're going to do today. Okay? So what I did, and I've had this board for years, I got this cutoff of some furniture grade 3/4 inch plywood. I sanded it down and put just a thin coat of polyurethane on it. You don't have to do that, but I find that by doing that, it actually helps this stuff last a little longer, right? But the plywood is soft enough where the staples go in nice and easy, but it's rigid enough where it's going to do what we need it to do, which is support the paper. Okay? And I don't know if you can see it on the camera. I've had this thing, I've used it for a long time, so you can see all kinds of little holes in it from the staples, but they don't affect the product when you put it on. Okay. If it gets really bad, I'll just sand it down a little bit and put a new coat of polyurethane on it, and it's good to go. But I've had this thing for, I don't know, years. I don't know how many years. And like I said, I've never had to do anything with it other than that initial preparation. The materials you're going to need today to follow along, you're going to need some sort of a container to put water in. You're going to need an old towel. You're going to need a staple gun. It could be manual or it could be electric. It doesn't matter. And you're going to need water, of course. And you are going to need a board. So I'm going to clear this stuff out the way, and then I'm going to show you how this is done. Alright, so the term stretching the watercolor paper is kind of misleading because you're not stretching it like you would a canvas. What you're actually doing is you're going to be saturating the paper. As the paper gets saturated with water, it begins to expand a little bit. Okay? And then you, when the paper is completely saturated, that's when you want to attach it to the board, right? And then over time, as the paper starts to dry, it shrinks. And because it's being held down by the staples, it actually stretches itself. And the reason that this is so effective is because this process can happen over and over again, right? So like when I can't paint on a painting like day after day and I have to leave it for, you know, some time, a week or whatever because of work, when I come back and I will re-wet the paper and it buckles, as it dries, it stretches itself again. Okay. So it's much more effective, especially on the bigger sheets of paper, than if you were working on with the tape. Because yes, you can use the craft tape, and I've tried it before, but I find that it tends to fail a lot more than the staples do. Okay, so just to kind of show you a little bit what's going on, I got my drawing already done, and you don't have to have a drawing. You can actually stretch paper without the drawing. And I went ahead and put a 1-inch border around it, and that's my cut point. So later on, when this is all done, I'm actually going to be cutting this away because that's where the staples are going to be. So it's kind of important that you plan ahead so that you don't put anything that's important near that mark. Okay. So even though this looks wet, when you turn around, I don't know if you can see it, there are areas where it's still kind of like dull. That means there's not enough water in there. So I'm just going to put it in there. And because this tub is not quite as big as I would like, I have to kind of go back and forth. And really, it just takes a little while. Ideally, like if I'm doing a full sheet, what I do is I actually use my bathtub. And I just put about 1 inch of water in the bathtub, drop the paper in there for 10 minutes, take it out and stretch it. So, but for today's purpose, we're just using this little tub. And the big thing here is really you just want to make sure that the water is really filling up all of the paper into the pores. Where when we do it with the spray bottle, and you've seen me do that in a different video, you have to kind of keep flipping the paper and spraying it with the spray bottle and working it in, and it takes a lot longer. Alright, so I'm going to let that soak for a little bit, and then I'll be back to show you guys how to actually stretch it. Alright, so this drawing has had plenty of time to get saturated, and you'll know because it's very shiny on both sides. There aren't any dry spots, so you're pretty confident that it's fully saturated. Usually takes about 10 minutes if you're doing it all at once. And like I said, when I do this, a lot of times I will actually just use my bathtub. But when I'm doing multiple, like if I'm getting ready for a show and I'm doing multiple drawings or multiple paintings, I'll sometimes use these smaller scales and do 4. I'll do 2 on this side, 2 on the opposite side. And that way everything will be stretched, and then I can just paint. Next thing that you want to do is take your towel, and all you're doing is kind of smoothing this out and removing any of the extra water. Okay, that's all there is to it. Then you simply take your staple gun and you want to go around the border all the way around. You want to go approximately, I would say, 1.5 to 2 inches apart. I'm just going to use the hand one. And don't put this too close to the edge. As the paper starts to contract, if you have it close to the edge, it'll actually rip it off. So you want to get it halfway between your 1-inch line and the edge. And notice that I use the staple going this way. I don't ever want to staple here because this will leave an imprint on the wet paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around. unlike working with a canvas, you don't have to alternate. You can just go all the way around, because remember, the way that this is going to be stretched is not through actually pulling, it's actually through drying. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and go all the way around, and then I'll be right back. So there you have it. So this is all taped all the way around. Excuse me, not taped. It's all stapled all the way around. And now I can actually start painting on this while the paper is wet. Because the paper is really saturated, it actually takes a nice long time to dry. So if you're doing wet on wet techniques, this is actually the perfect time to do some of it. Keep in mind though, when the paper is damp like this, you won't be able to do any detail work. Okay. Alright, so once you're done working on your painting, the easiest way that I found to remove the painting from the board is to actually cut it off, right? I don't like to take the staples off while the painting is still on here, and the reason for that, if your tool slips or anything, you could actually create some damage on here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to get my straight edge and an X-Acto knife, and I'm going to go ahead and just remove the painting from the board. Okay, so there you have it. You have painting completely done, cut away. You can see it's a rough cut, so then I'll use my paper cutter to do a final cut. And you can see that there's virtually no buckling. The paper is pretty darn flat. Okay, so that's pretty much the way you remove this from the board. To remove the staples from the board, what I would recommend is this: take your paper and just get it off, like so, all the way off, all the way around. And then you can either use a screwdriver, or if you have a staple remover, you just pop off these staples. Sometimes they come right off, and sometimes you have to use a little extra force to get them out. Okay, and that's it. And then this board is ready to use again. Okay. To recap, when do you want to stretch watercolor paper? Anytime you're using a half sheet or bigger, right? You want to make sure that you're using 3/4 or 1/2 inch plywood, and you want to use a commercial staple gun like this or like this. And the size of the staples, these are 1/2 inch, but you can go 3/8. You can even go 1/4, because think about it, the watercolor paper is not that thick. Okay, make sure you're doing this on watercolor paper that's 140 pounds or thicker, and make sure that the watercolor paper is the stretchable kind. Okay, all right, so I hope this helps. So the next time that you're taking on a large watercolor painting, give this technique a try, and I think you'll be very satisfied with the results. All right, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video.